I like to think of it in terms of who cares. We talked about stakes all the time at Sundance using the language of saying, is this important to more than just the people in the film?
Hi, it's Spade from Storyteller Therapy. This is the podcast where I give the practical, emotional, and mental support for storytellers working in careers or working on careers in film and television. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Comment below your thoughts or questions about the content. This podcast is also available on Apple iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. All right, let's get started.
I'm Spade Robinson, and this is Storyteller Therapy. Listen, y'all, it's Thursday, and I, for one, am so excited. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that I'm here because today is the second iteration of our 3-week series on documentary filmmaking. Documentary is absolutely my thing. It has my heart. It's the type of film that I think I fell in love with first because of the people, because of the community, and I'm always going to love documentary for that. And plus, documentaries are just dope. So, this is our second week talking about documentary films. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today, we're going to talk about what you need to be thinking and doing before you start shooting your documentary. I know everybody is not in a position to go back and undo all of the overshooting and overthinking and just overfeeling associated with your documentary film, but you can use this for your next film. You can definitely do these before you start shooting again. Or if you haven't started shooting your film, it is the perfect time to pause, breathe, and figure these things out before you start shooting your documentary. The name of the game in doc is 1000% all about funding. Funding is associated with how you project your film into the world, what your proposal says, what your sample says, because there is such a limited amount of resources associated with funding documentary films, at least independent documentary films. Before we get into all of that, let's first check in. What are y'all watching? What are you watching and what are you reading? I'll tell you one thing that I've already seen it. I've seen a lot of iterations of it. So this film came to Sundance when it was a little bitty baby film. Oh my gosh. I think when it first came to Sundance, it was a proposal. So it was just an idea. The name of the film is I Am Not Your Negro. Back then, it was called something else. And it, of course, became this big, beautiful picture. It's a film that I love. It has an immense amount of structure and very intentional storytelling, but it is also highly experimental, very visceral, very, very smart film. I love this film because it's structurally sound. It has a spine that makes sense. There are these 3 deaths that happened over the course of Baldwin's life that impacted him deeply. And the film wraps itself around those 3 events. And in between those events, it is the story of the United States of America as associated with this relationship with Blackness. The use of Baldwin's words and very, very, very personal, never released letters and thoughts give it an emotional center that brings more higher stakes and more immediacy to these very sort of public deaths that we've all known about historically. It's a very, very special film that took a long time to make, and it came a very long way. So go see it. If you know it's good for you, go watch it. It's a beautiful movie. It's a very significant film. I think it's going to be one of those films that end up in a canon for films about this country, for films about Blackness, for films about Baldwin, for films about America's relationship with Blackness. It's a documentation of who we are as a group of people in terms of just human beings who live on this part of the world and what we need from each other to survive in some of the darkest ways. Go see it for all of those reasons. Okay. Let's get into our therapy session. This episode is all about what you should think about before you start shooting your documentary. If you are anything like me or a lot of the documentary filmmakers that I know, there is an interesting subject. Something is happening in the world. You have a camera or you know somebody with a camera. So you go shoot it. You're shooting, you're finding all this great stuff, or maybe you're not finding all this great stuff, but you know the great stuff is coming. And you get to this point where you're like, damn, I need money for my movie. And this is a really great subject matter, and I have these really great characters. So let me cut together this sample and apply to Tribeca Documentary Fund or Sundance Documentary Fund or Film Independent Documentary Lab, or there are so many of them, all of them, any of them. And you get rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. First of all, let me explain something. There's so little money. I mean, there's a lot of money. That's a lot. There is a lot of money. But there's so many filmmakers that in relationship to the amount of filmmakers there are trying to make documentaries, there is very, 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 very little money. Here's the good news. If you have a good film, you're not competing with 100% of people. You're competing with 20% of people. 80% of everything I watched at Sundance was god awful. It was terrible. And then there was 20% that was good. And of that 20%, 10% of it was really good. And out of that 10%, 5% was the best. I know that those numbers aren't healthy numbers, but hopefully it's encouraging to know that if it's base level good, then you have a much better chance. The problem is that good films aren't the ones that get funded. It's the really, really unbelievably good ones. So that you need to compete to be in there. So let's talk about how to get you there. First of all, you need to write a proposal, and I'll do an entire podcast on how to talk about your documentary film. And that is going to go into your written proposal because everybody asks for one. Even if nobody asks for an official written proposal, you still have to send me more information about your film or send me your synopsis. There's a lot that goes into that. No, that's another lie. There's not a lot that goes into that. You just have to know the language to use. So next episode will be about how to talk about your documentary to get funding. Right now, we're going to talk about what to put in your documentary sample to get funding. In the very beginning, one of the barriers to having a really good sample is having the time, space, energy, money, and understanding of the footage you have in order to produce a great sample. Many people think a sexy trailer is going to do the job. Sexy trailer is not going to do the job. I mean, we all know that a trailer is not a movie. If you're trying to get somebody to come watch your film and the film is done, a trailer works. For the process of submitting for a grant or an opportunity, a trailer doesn't work because I can't see the stuff of the movie. And all the questions I'm asking myself when I'm looking to fund something has everything to do with the scenes, the character, how the director crafts something. And none of that can be seen in the trailer. I can see what the movie's about in the trailer. I can see how high the stakes are. But then I want to see sample scenes or something like, okay, so how are you telling the story in particular as that director? So we have discovered that you're not going to put together a trailer. You're going to put together a legitimate sample. And in that sample, you want to display three main things: character, stakes, and perspective. And all of these things have to be compelling in their own right and in association with the other elements. But it's not a difficult thing to do. So when we talk about character, stakes, and perspective, I like to think of it as who cares, and why you. For character, I'm looking for who is this movie about? And remember, character does not have to be a person. It could be a body of people. It could be a movement happening. It could be a place. It could be a country. It could be an idea. Characters can be all of these things. I could develop a film and the main character is death. And death moves about the country through the lives of these people in this decaying economy. And in one family, there is the death of a person. And the next family, there's a death of hope. And the next family, there's a death of their business or something. So definitely be open to being really sophisticated about what character means. But you have to be clear of who the who is. Not that the audience has to be clear all the time. But if you're going to talk about this film, or if you're going to project this film to the world, or project it to liberal, well-meaning people who are charged with funding, I like to think of it in terms of who cares. We talked about stakes all the time at Sundance, using the language of saying, is this important to more than just the people in the film? The more people this particular situation affects, the higher the stakes are. Now, you can have high stakes like this is life or death for this person. So there's one version of high stakes where this is a life or death situation, right? We often see that in movies. If you don't do it, he's gonna die. There's another kind that you see often in documentaries where it's more like, if you don't do it, he's going to die. And him dying is a representation of everyone who's dying in this position in North Dakota from having no heat because of the corruption of the North Dakota government. Dun, 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 dun. It's a heavier hammer. And in documentary, it doesn't have to be dark and death and destruction, though it often is. But the point is, who cares? And I don't mean that in like, who cares? Like, this isn't important. But no, for real, in real life, I'm asking you, like, straight up, how many people care? How many people would care? How many people does this thing affect? And then the last one is perspective. Why are you, as the filmmaker, better positioned to tell the story than anyone else in the entire world? You have to be able to answer that question truthfully because it's going to show up on the screen. I'd like to think that it's not necessarily that you're within a certain community. Sometimes you're better positioned to tell the story because it's a very intimate family story and this is your mother with this disease and nobody else could get this footage. Nobody else could be in these rooms, in these hospital rooms. Nobody else could get that story out of her about that one time she fell down a well and she thought that she was never going to live past the age of 6 and now she can look at her grandchildren who are 6 and blah, whatever, right? Beyond that, you're best positioned to tell the story because your perspective on it is so fascinating and such a slice of a much larger perspective and so unique that nobody's ever thought about talking about this way. We talked a lot about this on the previous episode when we were talking about genre, and we talked about your unique perspective on a story and why that's important and how that elevates your film. So these are the 3 things that should be illustrated in your sample. These are the 3 things that I should get from watching your sample. I think the problem that a lot of filmmakers make is they have a sample that's too short or too long. And I don't know that there's a magic number. It has to be 13 minutes or less or 25 minutes or more. I think it's more about, especially if you're earlier on and you are just starting to shoot your film, and you're expected to know all of these. Oh, trust me, I know it's tough. You're expected to know all the stuff that's impossible to know. And you're expected to have this perspective that's how would you know what to draw out of all of this footage? But you have to know, and you're absolutely expected to know. Because people who have more resources than you, they know. A, they know that they need to know. And B, they zone in for it and make sure they capture it. So that's what I need for you to do. So let's dig into how you're going to make this happen. It's too short if I watch your sample and I can't extrapolate. Extrapolate, is that a word? Extrapolate. I can't I think it's extrapolate. Okay, I can't get from it who's the character, who's really the character, right? Because sometimes you have a character and then you have who's really the character. So for a film like I Am Not Your Negro, you have a main character, James Baldwin, but then you have who's really the character. And it's a study on the United States of America. What are the stakes? And basically that definition is what is there to be lost or gained? And of course, that's better if we know more people care about that or more people will be affected by what is to be lost or gained. The more people, the better. The higher level, the better, right? And then why you? What's your perspective? Too many times I see something and I'm just like, okay, I've seen this 100 million times and one. So let's use an example to dig into this a little deeper. Let's say I have a film. There's a community center down the street from my house, and they give chess classes to kids from the neighborhood. And it is these older gentlemen who come from the convalescent home. Is that even the right, is that politically? I don't know if that's the right name. They come from the senior citizen home, and they teach young kids how to play chess. And I want to do a movie about that. Now, we learned in the last episode that that is not a story. That is a subject matter. Okay, so first we want to make that into a story. a lot of times the story is centered around characters. So we find one elderly gentleman and one kid, and we center on their relationship. Great. So now we know who. Let's move to the stakes. Who cares? In your movie that I just made up, the only people that care is this old man and this little boy. That's great. It's a sweet film. It's going to do well. It's going to play whatever festival it plays and end up wherever it ends up on broadcast, and that's that. And then you sort of live to fight again another day. Or you can make the stakes even higher, which means that this relationship between these two people is a microcosm of something else. Now, you can do the really lame version of it where it's like, these kids from the hood have no other opportunities, but Chester's saving their lives. Please don't do that. I beg of you. First, I mean, do I have to go into why? Maybe I do have to go into why. It's just whack. It's just whack. It's easy. It's simple. It's usually something that somebody from outside the community does, and it shows. It's like bleeding with like white privilege and a privileged lens on something that you don't understand, and it's just whack. So please don't do that. But let's say that you're a lot smarter than that. You're a lot more sophisticated filmmaker than that. So then you're looking for something else. And your stakes are not that the center's going to close. I mean, I guess that's easy if that's going to happen. But that the character is perhaps really time. And that these two people spending time together allows them to suspend time. So on one hand, you have someone who's older. His impending death is breathing down his neck. And he's allowed to pause and just be a competitor and just be smart. And then we can dig into, on his end, what all is associated with his aging. You have another character who's also allowed to stop time when he plays chess. He's someone who is growing up rapidly, given everything he's exposed to. And it would be super easy to be like, oh, his mother is a single mother. His older brother is in jail or whatever. Except you're smarter than that. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at it differently and take a very thin slice of that, which brings about your perspective, like why this is interesting to you as a filmmaker, as opposed to why it should be interesting to like some other vague person. You're looking at his relationship with video games and how he's exposed to a lot of just mature ideas that allow him to go into autopilot, right? He's able to use these like very non-intellectual parts of himself, the very like visceral human nature knee-jerk reactions to get through the game. In this setting, he's allowed to just be a smart boy and only use his brain, and time can stand still. And the rest of his body, the rest of his mind can relax. I want to watch that documentary. Those are the characters. This is what it's really about. It's about time. And the stakes are super high because this one person is going to die. And this other person, this little boy, is perhaps going to be moving away. And so when he moves away, he's not going to have access to this community center and therefore is not able to stop time. Which means that the other parts of him, the other parts of his mind, the other parts of his body, his very knee-jerk, visceral self is going to take over, which may lead to whatever. Right? Now, the reason why it's more important than just these two people is because we have all of these people who are of a mature age, and it's not just the man in this center. It's the idea of aging in general, right? And we have for this little boy, the stakes are super high because we have someone who it's not just about his life. It's about the lives of everyone who is exposed to these types of games or in these types of environments where their visceral selves come to the surface. And you put all of that pressure, all of that contextual pressure on these two people, and they have to accomplish something together. So we want to know, yes, if they're going to win the game, but if them winning the game means that this other person's life continues to have meaning at the end of his life or something, or he's able to validate something from his past or something. And this little boy is able to build up a muscle in his brain that becomes stronger or as strong as the other parts of himself. And of course, if it's possible for these two people, it's possible for everyone. So the stakes become higher. And then, of course, embedded in that is your unique perspective that rises above the idea of what someone who is not thinking about these things is going to bring to the table. Now that we know what our sample should do, we need to figure out how to make it do that. And the enemy of that is going to be overshooting. That may or may not be somewhere embedded in the hours upon hours upon hours upon hours that you sat at this community center and just like shot these chess games. And they're not that interesting to watch. It's chess. It's like if you're not the one playing, it's just not very visually stimulating. That's the thing about documentary filmmaking is it's an inherently visual medium. So your documentary needs to be visual. It needs to be visually stimulating. That's the point of it. Otherwise, you could have written an article about it and be done. You're making a movie about it because we're going to look at it. So you see how those three things are woven together? You don't want to overshoot because you don't want that to be too watered down or hard to get out of the footage that you've shot. So before you shoot, you want to plan to make sure that your sample communicates all these things. And you want to do that by writing a script. Personally, this is for me. This is not for everyone. It may be different for different people. Some people may have 27 minutes of really great footage, and that really gets at the heart of what you're looking at. I like a sweet spot of around 13 minutes for a development proposal. 13 minutes gives you enough time to really get at the heart, the story you want to tell, but not overly communicate how much you don't know what you're doing yet. Because you don't. It's so early, right? That's my personal idea of a sweet spot. Obviously, it's different for different people. I've seen development proposals that have been 30-something minutes. They're so good because the scenes are just long and intentional and beautiful. So you're going to write a script. Even before you start shooting your film, before you know what characters you have, before you know who it's about, who it's really about, any of that, what the stakes are, you want to write a script of your perfect sample. If I'm making the film that we just talked about, my perfect sample may look something like this. I'm in a cafeteria and a lot of elderly people are filing through a line in a cafeteria and they're getting their breakfast and they're sitting down and they're talking about different things and they're getting dressed. And then I may go to an apartment building. In the apartment building, kids are running out with their backpack, and we start to follow one kid who has to run back upstairs and get his homework, then run back downstairs, and he's late for the bus. The elderly people, they are reading books in the library at their home, and they're doing different things, and somebody takes out a chessboard and they're practicing chess, and then we go back to the school, and the school is a lunchroom, and maybe a fight breaks out, or maybe everybody's eating lunch and, somebody starts to rap and then somebody pulls out a chess board, or there's an announcement that chess club is meeting during lunch. So we follow the same little boy and he goes to do that. And then we end up after school and they're at the center. Sitting on the big sofa at the center are these video games. There are all these kids playing these video games and the voiceover starts. The little boy starts talking about, I love video games. I get to shut off my brain. I don't have to think about this and I don't have to think about that. My body just does all the work and I get to just be whoever I want to be. And I'm not expected to blah, 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 blah. And then you go to the older guy. He is putting up his chess pieces and packing up his stuff to get ready for the lesson. And his voiceover is talking about how he was never really good at anything. And if he had one regret, it's that he didn't spend enough time with his children. Now everyone is off doing their own thing and he doesn't have that kind of relationship where he can really just call and chop it up. Feels like his life is over and he didn't really accomplish anything. He was born, he worked, and now he's about to die. And then you show these two people together and they're playing chess and it gets more and more intense and more and more intense. And then next thing you know, they're the last people there. And there's no words between them. Nothing has to be said. And then the older guy wins the game. He says something like, I wish that I could talk to little boy and figure out something about his life. I don't know anything about him. This is just another thing I do to pass along the time until there's no more time. The little boy walks out and says he doesn't, I play with him every week. I don't even know his name. But, he just calls me smart boy. The boy gets on the bus and he's on his way home and his voiceover is talking about he doesn't like being called smart boy. He would know he was really smart if he was able to beat him. And then he files back into his apartment building. Dozens, twice his age. he sits down with them and goes back into the video game and says something to the extent of, okay, now I can turn my brain back off. That the part of him that just reacts is so much bigger than the other part. Maybe that's why he's never won a match or something. Maybe that's why he can't beat the other guy. But he can always win in video games. Maybe that is your perfect version. It's what would communicate the story that you want to tell. So once you have this script, now you need to go shoot it or shoot something like it, which means you know the kind of characters you have in your mind. Now you're open enough to be blown away by characters that you never imagined, but you do not need to walk into that community center looking for the most interesting people. You could be shooting for 3 weeks, waiting for somebody to catch your eye. I mean, I think it's a very noble idea that we put into like the discovery of we just romanticize it so much. I went all the way to Nepal looking for the most interesting person. And then I discovered the most interesting person to be a bricklayer. I'm just like, okay, girl, that's cool. But if you don't have the time or the resources or just the energy, there's no prize for who took the longest to make a documentary. I think it's something that's unnecessarily expensive, really hard emotionally, because you have such an earnest idea of what you want to say or that you want to say something. You feel to do it in the most pure way is going to somehow elevate your film, when in actuality, you're muddying the waters by overshooting and capturing all this stuff that you don't really have enough distance to know whether it's good or not, or to make any real decisions. So you don't make any real decisions. And then you talk about your film in vague terms, and then you submit a vague sample. It's just not, and it takes you a really long time to finish it. It's just, that's fine, but then also you don't have to. So once you're done with the script, you go find the people that fulfill these roles, or at least fill roles that feel as significant or as compelling to you. And then you shoot those scenes. You don't go to the center and say, what time are you guys doing your lesson? And then you show up for the lesson and then you shoot that. And then you go to a little boy and you say, okay, well, I just want to shoot you in your home life. So what's going on in your home life? Now, those are general questions you want to ask just to make sure there's nothing more interesting happening than what you have in mind. But for the most part, you know that you want to get a shot of him that accomplishes the same thing as that apartment shot. So whether it's him getting off the school bus or a group of people or his local hangout. If he's not that young, I'm sure he's too young to have a hangout. But, just shoot him having breakfast with his family because you think that's like great access to him in his home life. No, you can have a bunch of scenes like that and they mean absolutely nothing. There could be interesting things that happen. He could drop the toast and the dog eats it and his father comes in and he's drunk and he's like, I told you not to feed that dog bread. That has nothing to do with your story. And when you go to shoot just to shoot stuff, a lot of interesting stuff happens and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I got this. And then you're really confused about why your movie doesn't make any sense. Okay. So what you have now is you have a script. You've recruited or casted characters based on the characters in your script. You have decided that you're going to shoot scenes that are like the scenes in your script or that accomplish the same thing emotionally as what you have in your script. And then you go shoot it and then you cut it and then you watch it and then you decide whether this sample accomplishes what you want to accomplish or do you need something else. But the thing is because you've already shot it and you've edited it together, then you know what you need as opposed to being like, this is missing something. Is it cilantro? What is it? White pepper? Like, what is it? It's like, no, you know what I'm missing? I don't have anything with him in a large group of people. I don't have anything of the older gentleman talking about his major regret because I know I wanted that and I don't have that. Or I have it, but I feel like it's not visual enough. It's just him standing there talking about it. If I took him to the home where he raised his family, I'd have a much more visual, more emotionally potent, probably with less words, version of him dealing with regret and us being able to see that and be able to see how he feels like he has a new opportunity with this young boy. So you know exactly what you're looking for. Okay. I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, please drop me a line. You can find me at Story Consulting Services on Facebook, or you can email info@storyconsultingservices.com. And I will reply to you there and answer your questions on this very podcast. For news, I want to let you guys know that I will be speaking at the Bad West, which is the Black Association of Documentary Filmmakers, West. I'll be speaking at their membership meeting. It's Thursday, February 8th, 2018, coming up. It's from 7 to 9 at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It's at the Mary Pickford Center. That's 1313 Vine Street on the first floor conference room in LA. I think it's like, if you're not a member, it's like $5. But there is free parking in the rear, and they want you to bring an ID. I'm going to be talking about documentary storytelling. The name of the talk is Story. But basically, what I really want to do is talk about documentary story in terms of genre. And I really want to use it as a workshopping session, which is an opportunity to use specific documentaries from people who are going to be there to talk about how to position their documentaries the best way for the most compelling version of their story, and to garner support, because that is, at the end of the day, what fuels our documentary films. How do I get support for my film? You get support for your film by telling the most compelling version of your story. Okay, so how do I do that? You do that by looking at the genre of your picture and realizing, okay, in this genre, the most compelling way to approach it in this genre are these things. And that's what we talked about last episode. That's also what I'm going to be talking about coming up this coming Thursday, February 8th. Okay, so here's the homework. I mean, you can guess what the homework is. The homework is to write your script. Even if you are in a place where you've already shot a whole lot, you need to pause, especially if you are lost in the sauce. Pause and write the script for your perfect film. Then extrapolate. Why do I keep trying to say that word? Take out the footage that fits that and plug in the holes when you go back into production. It sounds like I'm oversimplifying it, and I know it's really hard work, and it's a lot of mental work, because there are a lot of babies associated with what you shot, which is why I want you to do this process as early as possible, because when you enter in relationships with your characters, it's difficult to know what's precious for your story and what's not precious. Do it as soon as possible. It will save you lots of time and money, which everybody needs. Okay, that's it for this week. I will see you guys next Thursday. Be there or be square. Next Thursday is when we're going to be talking about how to talk about your documentary to get funding. Don't miss it. Again, you can send us a message. Just look us up on Facebook, Story Consulting Services, or go to facebook.com/Story Consulting Services, and then just send us a message through Messenger. That is all I have for today. But until next time, it's been real.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Storyteller Therapy and Investing in You. Comment your thoughts or questions down below. Learn more about our labs, services, and support at atlantafilmproject.com. Stick around for the next episode. See you in a few minutes.